The Branford place had a reputation before Susannah Voss ever set eyes on it. People in Hatchet Creek said it was a working ranch, not a welcoming one. They said the man who ran it hadn't hired a housekeeper in 2 years, not since his last one quit without warning and took the good cast iron with her. They said Emmett Branford didn't much care for conversation, didn't much care for strangers, and didn't much care what anyone thought about either of those facts. Susannah had heard all of this at the feed store, standing near the door with her carpetbag at her feet and nowhere particular to go. She had arrived in Hatchet Creek 3 days earlier on the stage from Laramie, carrying what remained of her life in that single bag and $11 folded into the lining of her coat. Her mother had died in March. The house had gone to creditors in April. By May, she was on a stage, heading west because west was the only direction that felt like it still had room in it. She was 24 years old, and she had not cried once since her mother's funeral, and she was not about to start now, not in a feed store in a town she didn't know, in front of a man named Mr. Purdy who was watching her with more pity than she could stand. "I'm not particular about the work," she told him. "I can keep a house, manage accounts, cook, mend, and manage a kitchen garden if there's soil for one. I just need something steady." Mr. Purdy looked at her over his spectacles. "Branford's place is steady," he said. "It's just not easy." She told him that was fine. She had not come west looking for easy. The ride out to the Branford ranch took most of a morning. Mr. Purdy had arranged for his nephew to take her in the wagon, a quiet boy of about 16, who seemed to have inherited his uncle's tendency toward long silences. They passed through scrub brush and open range, the land flattening out in all directions, until the sky felt enormous and close at once. Susannah sat with her carpetbag in her lap and watched the country roll past and thought about how different it was from Ohio. Everything there had been green and hemmed in by trees. Here the light came straight down, with nothing to stop it. The ranch appeared before she expected it. It was not what she had imagined. She had pictured something neglected, half falling, the kind of place that looked like an apology. Instead, there was a solid 2-story house with a wide front porch, a barn that had been recently re-roofed, 3 separate outbuildings, and a fence line that ran straight and tight as far as she could see. It was not a beautiful place, but it was a serious one. Emmett Branford was standing near the barn when the wagon pulled in, and he did not come over to meet it. He watched them arrive the way a man watches weather, attentive, but not particularly moved. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had been worked over thoroughly by sun and wind. His hat was the color of old leather, and he held it by the brim as he walked toward them, which was the closest thing to a greeting she would get. "You're the woman Purdy sent," he said. "Susannah Voss," she said. "Yes, sir." He looked at her the way he'd looked at the wagon, assessing, not unkind but not warm either. "Can you start today?" "I can." He nodded once and turned back toward the barn. "House is open. Kitchen's in the back. Boy eats at noon." She stood there for a moment after he'd gone. The wagon was already turning around. The silence was enormous and full of insects and the distant sound of cattle somewhere out of sight. She picked up her carpetbag and went toward the house. The boy's name was Kit. He was 9 years old and he had his father's eyes, which was to say careful and brown, and not quick to give anything away. He was sitting at the kitchen table when Susannah came in, reading a primer, with a focused expression that made him look much older than he was. "You the new housekeeper?" he asked. "I am. Susannah Voss." He considered her. "The last one left in the middle of the night, so I heard. She took the big skillet. I heard that too." Susannah set down her bag and looked around the kitchen. It was not dirty, exactly. but it had the particular quality of a space that had been managed rather than cared for, functional, joyless, and quietly losing ground. There was dust on the high shelves. The curtains had not been washed in some time. The woodbox was half empty. "Is there a smaller skillet?" "In the bottom cupboard," Kit said, and went back to his primer. She found the skillet, found the pantry, found what she needed. She made biscuits and beans, and a pot of coffee, and set the table for 3 without being asked. Because there were 3 people in this house, and all 3 of them needed to eat. When Emmett Branford came in at noon, he stopped in the doorway for a moment, looking at the third place setting. He didn't say anything. He sat down, poured his own coffee, and ate. Kit ate beside him. Susannah took the third chair and ate as well, quietly, because there was no reason not to, and she was not going to pretend she wasn't hungry. No one spoke for most of the meal. That was fine with Susannah. She was not there to fill silence. She was there to work. She had expected the work to be hard. She had not expected to find, underneath it, such a specific kind of disorder. It announced itself slowly. The missing buttons on Kit's shirts she discovered on the second day, and mended them. The leaking corner of the root cellar she found on the third, and reported to Mr. Branford, who fixed it the same afternoon without comment. These were ordinary things. The other things were not. On the 4th day she went to settle the household accounts and found the ledger. It was kept in the small office off the front hall, a narrow room lined with shelves and smelling of old paper. The ledger was on the desk, fat and worn at the corners, and when she opened it, she understood almost immediately why the previous housekeeper might have wanted to leave. The accounts were a mess, not through carelessness. She could see that. There was a system here, or had been once, but it had been worked against. Payments had been double-entered. Suppliers listed at inflated prices. A bill from a feed merchant in Casper appeared 4 times across 3 months for what appeared to be the same delivery. Whoever had been managing these books had been doing so in a way that cost Emmett Branford money steadily and quietly, like a slow leak in a barrel. Too small to notice on any given day, significant over time. She sat with the ledger for 2 hours. Then she went and found Mr. Branford in the near pasture. "Mr. Branford," she said, "I need you to look at something." He looked up from the fence post he'd been setting. "Something wrong with the house?" "Something wrong with your accounts." He was quiet for a moment. Then he set down his tools and came with her. She showed him what she'd found. She did not editorialize. She laid out the numbers plainly, pointed to each discrepancy, and let the facts make their own argument. He stood over the desk with his arms crossed, reading, and his face did not change much, but something in his jaw went tight and stayed that way. "How long?" he said. "At least 14 months from what I can see, possibly longer." She hesitated. "I can only say what the ledger shows." He nodded slowly. "What would you need to fix it?" she told him. "Access to the original receipts, correspondence with the suppliers, and time." He gave her all 3 without hesitation and left her to it. That was when she understood something about Emmett Branford that she hadn't expected. He was not a man who gave trust easily. But when he gave it completely. There was no hovering, no second-guessing, no checking on her work twice in an afternoon. He had looked at what she showed him, made a decision about her, and acted on it. That was its own kind of respect, and she felt it more than she'd felt anything in some time. The work of correcting the accounts took 3 weeks. Susannah wrote letters to the suppliers. She cross-referenced every entry against every receipt she could find. She discovered that one of the feed merchants, a man named Mr. Culpepper, out of Casper, had been in something like a quiet arrangement with the ranch's previous manager, a man who was no longer employed and no longer in the county. The inflated invoices, the phantom deliveries, the double entries. These had all passed through hands that were no longer here to answer for them. But the damage was still here, recorded faithfully in the ledger, and she was determined to account for every dollar of it. She did this in the evenings, after Kit had been put to bed, sitting at the desk in the narrow office, with the lamp turned up and the window open to let in the night air. It was quiet work and she did not mind it. She had always been good with numbers. Her mother had called it a peculiar talent for a woman to have, and had said it in a tone that suggested she considered it almost unfeminine, and Susannah had spent years feeling vaguely apologetic about it. She did not feel apologetic about it now. Mr. Branford came by the office some evenings. He would stand in the doorway for a moment, look at whatever she was doing, and ask a brief question or offer a brief observation. He never stayed long, but he always came. She began to notice things about him. The way he checked on the barn last thing before bed, every night, in all weather. The way he knew every animal on the ranch by sight, and could tell at a distance if something was wrong. The way he always made sure Kit had enough on his plate before he served himself, done so automatically without apparent thought, in the manner of a man who had been doing it so long it had stopped being a decision. He had been raising the boy alone. For 4 years, she learned. Kit's mother had died of fever when Kit was 5. There was no other family nearby. It was just the two of them and the ranch, and the particular silence that settles over a house where loss has been absorbed into the walls. She did not ask about any of this directly. She learned it the way you learn most things in a quiet household, in fragments, from passing remarks, from things left unsaid. She had been at the Branford ranch for 6 weeks when the matter of Mr. Culpepper's outstanding balance came to a resolution. She had written to him twice, laying out the discrepancy clearly and asking for a correction to the account. He had not replied to the first letter. His reply to the second was dismissive, in a way she found almost impressively brazen. A single paragraph suggesting that the error, if there was one, was on the ranch's end, and that if Mr. Branford wished to dispute the charges, he was welcome to come to Casper and discuss it in person. Susannah read this letter at breakfast, set it down beside her coffee cup, and looked at it for a long moment. "What is it?" Kit asked, because he was a perceptive child and missed very little. "A letter from a man who believes that if he is rude enough, the problem will go away," Susannah said. Kit considered this. "Does that work?" "Not always," she said. She wrote back to Mr. Culpepper that afternoon. She was very polite. She was also very precise. She itemized every discrepancy, cited the dates of every corresponding delivery record, attached copies of the original invoices with the inflated figures circled, and noted, in her final paragraph, that she had taken the liberty of writing as well to the commercial office of the territorial governor. As she understood, they had an interest in cases of supplier fraud operating across county lines. She was not certain this was true, but she was quite certain Mr. Culpepper was not certain either. His reply arrived 8 days later. It included a bank draft for the full amount of the disputed charges. She brought it to Emmett Branford while he was at the fence line, because that was usually where he was in the late afternoon. "Mr. Branford," she said, and held out the draft. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. "How?" he said. "Carefully," she said. Something shifted in his expression. It was not quite a smile. She would not have called it that. But it was something adjacent to one, a brief loosening around the eyes, there and gone before she could be sure of it. He took the bank draft and looked at it again, and then he said, "Miss Voss." "Sir, you've more than earned your wages." He folded the draft and put it in his shirt pocket. "I hope you know that." She nodded and turned to go back to the house, because there was still supper to start. She was halfway across the yard before she let herself feel it, a small, quiet warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Summer came on full and hard. The days were long and hot and full of work, and Susannah found that she did not mind this the way she had sometimes minded hard work before, when it had felt like something she was trapped inside. Here the work had shape and outcome. She could see what she did. The house was cleaner than it had been. The kitchen garden she had planted along the south side of the house was coming in. Tomatoes, beans, squash, a row of herbs she'd started from seed. Kit had helped her with the planting and had appointed himself chief inspector of the tomatoes, checking them every morning with a gravity that she found entirely endearing. He had warmed to her slowly, in the measured way of children who have learned to be careful. But he had warmed. He asked her things now, about Ohio, about what she had studied, about whether she thought rain was going to come before Friday. He showed her his drawings, which were meticulous and strange and very good. He told her once, in a matter-of-fact voice, that he thought she was better at accounts than anyone he'd ever seen, and she had to look away so he wouldn't see how much that landed. She was teaching him to keep a simple ledger of his own. He had taken to it immediately, in the focused, serious way he took to most things. She thought he would be formidable at it when he was older. She found herself thinking about him being older, which meant she had begun, without quite deciding to imagine still being here when that happened. She did not look too closely at that thought. She was careful with it. She was careful with a number of things that summer. She was careful about how often she let herself watch Emmett Branford from the kitchen window while he worked. She was careful about how much she allowed herself to notice. The way he moved through the landscape, like he belonged to it. The way he never wasted emotion. The way he sometimes sat on the porch steps, at day's end with his hat in his hands, looking out at the rangeland with an expression she couldn't entirely read, but felt, somehow, that she understood. She was careful because she knew what her position was. She was the housekeeper. She was employed, and she had come to this place with nothing, and whatever she had managed to build here was real and necessary. And she would not risk it on something as uncertain as the thing she suspected she was beginning to feel. She kept her distance. She was very good at it. What she did not know, could not have known, keeping her distance, was that Emmett Branford was doing the same thing for the same reason, and was not as good at it as she was. The trouble, when it came from the direction she had least expected. It was early August. She had gone into Hatchet Creek for supplies, driving the smaller wagon alone, which Mr. Branford had suggested, and Kit had enthusiastically endorsed, because it meant she would pass the Dunnigan farm, which had a dog he was fond of. She had completed her errands at the dry goods and the apothecary, and was loading the wagon when Mr. Aldous Sim, who owned the bank in Hatchet Creek, and had the cheerful disposition of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room, appeared at her elbow. "Miss Voss," he said, "isn't it?" "Mr. Sim," she said. "I was hoping to have a word." He smiled. The smile did not involve his eyes at any point. About the Branford account, she turned to face him fully. "The ranch accounts are in order, Mr. Sim." Of course, of course." He waved a hand. "I don't doubt your bookkeeping, Miss Voss. I'm talking about something a little more foundational." He paused, clearly enjoying the pause. The note on the northern pasture, due end of September. She had not known about this note. She kept her expression neutral. "I'll discuss it with Mr. Branford." "You do that." Another smile. "Just between us, it's going to be a tight thing. Cattle prices this summer haven't been what anyone hoped, and the bank's been patient." He tilted his head. "I'd hate to see the Branford place broken up. Such a well-run ranch. Under the circumstances." She understood perfectly what he was doing. He was not telling her this to be helpful. He was telling her this to let her know that he knew things she didn't, and that her position here was not as solid as she might imagine, and that Emmett Branford's difficulties were perhaps about to become her difficulties too. "Thank you, Mr. Sim," she said pleasantly. "Good day." She drove back to the ranch with her hands steady on the reins and her mind working. She did not bring it up at supper. She waited until Kit had gone to bed, and then she knocked on the office door, which was closed, which meant Emmett Branford was in there, doing what he often did in the evenings, working over something he couldn't quite work out, in the particular silence of a man who carries problems alone by habit. "Come in," he said. She came in. She closed the door behind her. She stood across the desk from him and said, "Mr. Sim spoke to me in town today about the note on the northern pasture." He went still in the way he sometimes did. Not tense exactly, but very controlled. He had no business doing that. "No," she agreed. "He didn't." She paused. "Will you tell me the amount?" A long silence. Outside, a nighthawk called once and went quiet. "I can fix it," she said before he could answer or deflect. "I'm not saying that to be forward. I'm saying it because the accounts are in better shape than they were. The Culpeper money is back, and if you show me what we're working with, I think there may be a way to manage the September payment without selling the northern pasture." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite categorize. Not suspicion, not surprise exactly. Something more like the look of a man who has been carrying something a long time and has just been asked if he wants to set it down. "Why?" he said. It was a simple question, and it caught her off guard. "Why what? You've done your work, kept the house, fixed the ledger, recovered the Culpeper money." He leaned back in his chair. "You don't have to stay inside this problem." She thought about that. She thought about what it would mean to say the true thing, which was that, somewhere in the last 3 months, she had stopped thinking of this as just a problem she was being paid to manage. She thought about the kitchen garden and Kit's ledger, and the sound of the porch in the evening, and the way the light came across the rangeland at dusk. She thought about what she'd had before, which was almost nothing, and what she had here, which was not nothing at all. "No," she said carefully. "I don't have to, but I'd like to if you'll let me." He was quiet for a long time. Then he opened the desk drawer and took out a different ledger, older, heavier, and set it on the desk between them. "Sit down, Miss Voss," he said. She sat. They worked for 2 hours. He told her the full shape of it, the note, the terms, the August cattle count, what was coming in and what wasn't. She listened, asked questions, made notes. She could see, once she understood the whole picture, that it was not as bad as Mr. Sim had implied. It was tight, yes, it required care, but there was a path through it, if certain things were done in a certain order. She laid that path out for him. He followed it without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at her notes for a long time. "You went to school for this," he said. "My father taught me," she said. "He kept books for a mill in Ohio. He thought everyone in the family should know how." She paused. "My mother thought it was wasted on girls." Emmett Branford looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "Your mother was wrong," he said. She hadn't expected that. She looked down at her notes. "Yes," she said. She was. They navigated September together. It was not a dramatic thing. There was no single moment of rescue. It was, instead, a series of careful decisions made across several weeks. A timber sale that had been delayed too long, a buyer for some of the older stock that Emmett had not known was looking, a renegotiation with Mr. Sim that Susannah helped prepare for, and Emmett handled himself with a brevity and firmness that apparently left Mr. Sim with very little to say. Kit observed all of this with the attentiveness of a child who understands more than adults imagine. One afternoon toward the end of September, when Susannah was in the kitchen garden, harvesting the last of the beans, he came and crouched beside her in the dirt. "Is the ranch going to be all right?" he said. She looked at him. She thought about the right answer. "Yes," she said, "I think it is." He nodded, with a seriousness that made her chest feel strange. "Good," he said. "I didn't want to move." He reached past her and picked a bean she'd missed. "And I didn't want you to have to leave either." She was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light was coming through the bean plants in long, warm slants. Somewhere, in the near pasture, cattle moved. "I didn't want to leave either," she said. October brought cold mornings, and clear skies and the smell of wood smoke. Susannah had taken to sitting on the porch steps after supper, in the brief time, before the temperature dropped enough to drive her in. She wasn't sure when this had become a habit. She wasn't sure when Emmett had started sitting there too. He came out one evening with 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her on the step without asking. She accepted it the same way, without asking. They sat in silence, which had become a comfortable thing between them, and looked out at the rangeland, where the last of the daylight was doing something extraordinary along the ridgeline. "I've been thinking," he said, after a while. She waited. "The spring roundup is going to be bigger than last year." He turned the cup in his hands. "I'm going to need more help managing the accounts, more correspondence, more of the kind of work that takes." He stopped, started again. "The kind of work you do." "I can do that," she said. "I know you can." He looked at her. His face in the evening light was quieter than usual, which was saying something. "I'm not talking about the same arrangement." She looked at him. "I'm talking about something more permanent," he said. "If you were willing." "If that." He stopped again. He was not a man who found words easy. She had known this from the beginning, and she felt a sudden and complete tenderness for the difficulty of it. The way he was trying to say something large in the careful, economical language of a man who had spent years saying as little as possible. "If that's something you'd want." The stars were beginning to show, faint and scattered, and then more, the way they always did out here. You looked up, and there were a few, and then you looked again, and there were thousands. She had never seen stars like this in Ohio. "Emmett," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. He looked at her. "I would like that," she said, "very much." He nodded. He looked back out at the rangeland. She could see his jaw move once, the way it did when he was holding something in. "Good," he said. "Then, the coffee'll get cold." She picked up her cup. He picked up his. The stars went on, multiplying overhead, cold and enormous and indifferent to everything below them except to light it. And the porch was warm with the nearness of the house, and some inside Clet was probably still awake reading, and the ranch was quiet in the way that meant everything in it was all right. She thought about how she had arrived here with $11 and a single bag and no particular idea of what came next. She thought about the ledger and the letters and the note on the northern pasture. She thought about the third-place setting she had put out on her first day because she had been hungry and there was no reason not to be, and how small that had seemed at the time. It had not been small. She could see that now. None of it had been small. The coffee was warm in her hands. The night was clear and cold and full of stars. Emmett Branford sat 2 feet away from her on the porch steps, not saying anything, which was exactly what she needed him to do. She stayed until the cold drove her in, and then she came back out the next evening, and the evening after that.